how do you say like?
Yeah, now you feel the pressure. You understand when it's on you to start the episode, and then you're like, I've done this a million times before. I can easily do it. But then it's a whole nother realm when us two are just waiting and watching you.
All right. It's TV guys with our special guest Beth Pardo. Yeah! I've done better than that.
That was really good. I say
Not
do it
bad.
again. Do it again. And now that you got it, slow it down and you got it.
All right. That angle was also too high. I hope. It's welcome. It's TV guys with our special guest Beth Pardo. Yeah.
Hey everyone, welcome back to TV Guys, and gird your loins, ladies and gentlemen, because we are finally doing a Muppet episode. I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And I'm Beth.
There we go. We didn't give, usually with our guests, we warn them. We're like, hey, that's how our intro is going to be. And we didn't this time. So,
Nope.
Beth, we're flying by the seat of our pants. So thanks for sticking with us.
I figured it out. It was tricky, but I got there.
So this is a blast from the past for me, for the guests. So we've talked in the past how Matt and I were youth leaders back in the day. Well, even farther back in the day, before I knew Matt, Beth was one of my youth leaders back when I was one of the annoying junior high boys, which is a title I had all the way past high school somehow. And I think she's also the distinction of the only person whose house I have TP'd the inside of. Do you remember that?
Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
Yeah, your brother was visiting, and he let us inside your house when you were gone, and we TP'd the inside of it when I was like 14.
It was a disaster. I remember things got broke because we just yanked the toilet paper down, but it was tied to like precious breakable things.
Well, that sounds like it's on you.
Pretty much.
Way to shove that blame off, Brian. That's great.
Yeah.
And as a lot of you know, this is one of our first times not one of them. This is our first time having Beth on, and so of all the guests that we've had, she is definitely the Beth. So Beth, it's great to have you here.
Oh.
You're welcome. Hey, I know that you're a big Muppets fan, but what are some other TV shows that are like, these are shows that I love or that I watch a lot? What are maybe in your top three or still?
Oof. I mean, a lot of the ones that you guys talk about in the past. So, huge Office fan, Parks and Rec. I internally always have that, like, which one, if I was alone on an island and I could only have one show, which would it be? And I go back between the two.
Yeah.
Big Star Trek fan.
There you
pretty
go.
much anything sci-fi. I watch pretty much anything that Apple TV is putting out these days. But at the end of the day, I love a good, like a Scrubs, like a good comedy that's not necessarily a sitcom.
What's your favorite Star Trek show?
Oof. I recently did a Star Trek podcast and was asked that very question. And I think I really, really enjoy the current Star Trek Discovery.
Nice. I'm about 3 episodes in. I'm also rewatching Next Generation as well, and so I'm 2 seasons into that. So my time is spread wildly because I'm in the middle of at least 30 shows, and so I'll jump between different ones. I'm like, wait, where was I on this? But yeah, I'm interested so far in Discovery.
The only thing I'm rewatching right now is I'm rewatching Boy Meets World along with their podcast that I keep bringing up lately.
There you go. So having this be the first time we're actually dedicating a whole episode to Muppets, this kind of is the month that we're also doing that with another episode of ours that we're going to do in a couple weeks. We have never done a full Breaking Bad episode that's just fully devoted to that. We've talked about Breaking Bad. We've never fully devoted an episode to that. So that's a little taste for you guys coming up in a couple weeks. And that's another show that I kind of put everything else on pause. I'm like, you know what? I want to rewatch all of Breaking Bad in apparently 2 weeks. So I'm barreling through that right now.
Yeah, I think I'm probably not going to be able to rewatch the entire series, but I'll probably watch the greatest hits before that.
Sure. Well, Brian, you are like the biggest Muppet fan I know, and Beth, apparently you are either just as big or maybe even bigger, which blows my mind. So I'm going to kind of take a back seat, and I'll let you guys kind of direct how you want this episode to go.
Well, first, a great thing for our audio listeners. I'm just gonna step aside and take a chance to showcase this background, which is my collection of Muppet action figures that I've had since I was in high school.
That's impressive.
I love that you're doing the visual every single time. It's like, let's do a visual of something. It's an audio podcast.
But I can put videos on Facebook now.
That's true. You can. But
so my idea with this podcast was something I actually a while, like maybe 8-7 years ago, I thought, I'm going to do a blog, and then that ended up being a lot of work, and also nobody reads blogs, so I stopped that. And so the podcast is like where I can get all of my blog thoughts out, where some people will actually listen to them. And so one of the first ones I wrote was a whole long series, and I was rereading it. I'm like, I like the content, but I wrote way too much. Was about deciphering eras within Muppet history, because there's no definitive like eras, but I definitely think if you go back to the beginning, 1955, you can definitely, I've identified distinct what I call eras in Muppet history, and like what are the benchmarks from moving from one stage to the next. And that's kind of the blueprint of the podcast that I kind of envisioned for this.
Makes sense.
Sounds good. So start us off, Brian.
All right.
Yep.
So, I mean, we'll kind of breeze through the first couple, but so in the very beginning, going back to 1955, was when Jim Henson first created Kermit the Frog. There was a show called Sam and Friends, which was like this local in Washington, D.C. after the news, where it was basically just Kermit before he was even a frog and a couple of the characters, and they would just like lip sync to different records kind of thing. There's really not a whole lot to it. That's really all it is. It's just black and white little things. You watch now, you'd be bored. And then that kind of led into Jim Henson, even back then in the 50s and 60s, being known as like the puppet guy. And he would go on Ed Sullivan and The Tonight Show and have these little skits here and there, which also led to Rolf the dog, who was originally just created for a dog food commercial, going on the Jimmy Dean Show and being like the first Muppet to have like national fame. It's kind of just like keeping it all afloat, and they're kind of still known for their commercials. And they're collecting like Jerry Jewell, who's like a big time Muppet writer. Like half the time the Muppets are funny, it's because of Jerry Jewell, and Frank Oz and Jerry Nelson and all these great performers. And it all led up to what I call the primetime era, which is what we'll jump to, which is the height of the Muppets fame, starting with the Muppet Show. So I think we can just kind of skip the earlier stuff, and we're not really going to talk about Sesame Street. That could be a whole other podcast. That's kind of too broad.
I mean, Sesame Street is really like a huge testament to the lasting endurance of these puppets, because with Sesame Street, like I grew up on Sesame Street, and that was 20 years after it had came out. So for reference, that would be like someone having a kid now and them growing up on Arthur or on Rugrats or Blue's Clues, something like that. Like that feels so long ago, but it endured so much, and it still is going today.
And it's not a reboot; it's still the original run. They're on like season 53
exactly
or whatever it is.
It's nuts.
Can I clarify one thing though? Can we not use the word puppet in this? I feel like puppet is a little derogatory. They're Muppets and they're real, right? Yes. So I'd rather just refer to them.
I've never thought of the characters on Sesame Street as being Muppets. I've always thought of them as being puppets, but that the Muppets themselves are actual Muppets. Am I wrong? Like Fraggle Rock, also, I would call that puppets and puppetry. I'm sorry, Beth. I know I'm using a trigger word for you.
I've been in the room, regardless of TV show. I think they're all the same species. I think I would lump them all as Muppets. I don't know if you have a strong feeling about this, Brian.
No, I think I think they're all different categories of Muppets. It's kind of like how a Pomeranian and a Golden Retriever, they're both dogs. They're different types of dogs. They look different, but they're all dogs.
All right, I'll avoid using the P word, Beth. I'm very sorry that I've offended you.
I think you also already know why when we're doing a Muppet episode, she was the first one I thought of, and immediately messaged her saying, "Would you want to be on a podcast about Muppets?" And I think you just said yes with a bunch of exclamation marks.
Yes, because I do a lot of podcasts, and sadly they're health related. So the fact that someone wants to talk to me about something that I love instead of something I'm shackled with, I am thrilled to talk about the Muppets. And I think, Brian, you probably attest, you probably don't have a ton of people in your immediate life who are excited to talk about the Muppets.
Not really.
So
no.
just to be in the presence of another fan,
yes,
is invigorating.
we are going to talk about health related issues because the Muppets are on life support right now and they need your help. So you can dial this number for just a quarter a day. You can support a Muppet in a third world country.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely get to the Disney current era, which is we all have thoughts, but so let's skip ahead to the Muppet Show, which at the beginning wasn't necessarily the big success. Like Jim Henson was trying to get it on the air, and basically everybody told him no, and so eventually he had to film it in London. I don't know if a lot of people know that it was filmed in London, across the street from where the original Star Wars trilogy was filmed, which is why it made it easier to do the Star Wars episode. They just grab those guys and, hey, let's go over here and do this show for an episode. And so it's in the beginning of the show was a little bit different. A lot of the characters, especially like Fozzie and Gonzo, they sounded different. Their personalities were a little bit different. Oh, and Miss Piggy too. They were still finding the characters for sure. Like, and honestly, like the first season has some great moments, but I think it's not the strongest of the Muppet Show. Until later on, they found their footing. And in the beginning of that show, they had to like kind of stretch to find guest stars, and their big things. Like I was watching a video about it today. It was their goal, like, hey, we need to make sure that all the guest stars on this show have the best time. We're going to make sure like everything they want is taken care of. We're going to ask what they want to do, because they wanted them to be spreading the word, like, oh man, working on the Muppet Show is such a blast. Fast forward to by the end of the show, it was like they had celebrities banging on their door saying, I need to be on the Muppet Show. It was like a test of your fame. Like if you made it on the Muppet Show, you made it. And there could have been a world where the Muppet Show is still going on today. Like Jim Henson chose to end it after 5 seasons. He wanted to work on other projects, but there was talks about it being kind of like a Saturday Night Live where, over time, performers might retire and as they have, and it's just the show would still keep going. So it was interesting to see like what guest stars could they have had over the past 40 years if the Muppet Show had kept going.
Well, you see that a little bit even in like modern day movies too that they've done, or the more recent shows that we're going to get to that they were able to tap into. There is still that stigma of it. I mean, in the Muppets, the 2011 Muppets, John Krasinski's in it with I think one line maybe. Yeah. And it's like, and he wasn't like a schlub at that time. He was in the middle of the Office run. And so like to have John Krasinski with either 1 or 0 lines in the movie, like that just is a testament to, again, the star power that the Muppets have.
Yeah. I think the biggest thing about star power is there's a TV special you can watch on YouTube called The Muppets Go Hollywood. And have you ever seen this one, Beth?
I don't think so.
It was made in 1979. It was made to promote the Muppet movie. And it's hosted by Dick Van Dyke and Rita Moreno, and it was hosted at the Coconut Grove in Hollywood. And it was actually like a real event where they had like all these big name, like huge stars, but they were like, submitting the spotlight to the Muppets. It just shows like they had this huge, big Hollywood event specifically for the Muppets. The Muppets were that big of a star. Miss Piggy is going to make some great entrance where they carry her in like on the big poles, like she's Cleopatra, and they're going to do musical numbers, show clips from the movie. They're going to have Paul Williams go up and talk about writing Rainbow Connection, and it was just like it shows how much a big deal the Muppets were at that time compared to today, where it's like, oh, the Muppets, like, oh, they're still a thing. It's sad how like far they've come, but at that time in the late 70s, early 80s, they were like A-list stars.
Well, and I think it really cements too the fact that, and we all know this, but so many people don't, the Muppets were not first intended for children.
No.
These were adult celebrities. These were adult time slots that this was being aired in. It was never meant originally to be a children's show, and it certainly didn't carry itself as a children's show.
No.
Yeah. It was definitely family friendly, but there's a difference between being family friendly and aimed at kids. And I think Pixar has done that really well over the years of having that same sort of stuff, even though Pixar may be a little bit more aimed at kids than Muppets was.
Yeah. But I think the biggest thing that made the Muppets great in that time during the Muppet Show and the early Muppet movies is the characters. They weren't just generic characters. And I've seen, clips of Jim Henson and Frank Oz and Jerry Jewell talking about like that was important to them was the dynamics between the different characters. Like Kermit and Miss Piggy have that weird back and forth relationship where Miss Piggy is like aggressive and affectionate towards Kermit, and Kermit like has some feelings for her, but we're not really sure how it's supposed to go, and all the different stuff like the Electric Mayhem, and how specifically Floyd Pepper despises Miss Piggy, and how Fozzie is insecure, and Frank Oz once said he envisions that like everybody in the Muppet Theater has a key except for Fozzie Bear.
Oh, that sounds about right.
Yeah. And just how like Gonzo has like weirdest ideas, but all the confidence to go about it, and how Ralph is sometimes lazy, but just kind of so easygoing, and like all these characters have such distinct personalities, and you can put any two Muppets together and say how would these two interact in a scene together, and they can play with that and just throw in guest stars, and it just works.
And if you look at like general character archetypes, because a lot of writers can easily fall into, well, I have this familiar character outline and I'm just going to put this character on that. And like, like we talked about Lovable Oafs last week or 2 weeks ago, and Joey Tribbiani becomes the idiot with a heart. Like that's very easily his character, and there's not too much more that's deep besides that. But like, what's the character archetype that Gonzo falls into? I can't think of like a cliched version that Gonzo falls into. He's just such a unique character, and he's quite an oddball. And he's not an oddball like, say Cosmo Kramer or that comes later, or like, he's just a unique character that doesn't really fit into any sort of cliche.
But would you love to see a scene between Gonzo, Kramer, and Creed?
Gonzo would end up being the straight man. Just like, what? And the fact that he plays Charles Dickens too, that they picked Gonzo for the Charles Dickens role in Muppet Christmas Carol is hilarious.
Which I think is great. And Gonzo, I'll say, actually, maybe we should do this. So my favorite Muppet is Gonzo by far, because I identified with him so much because he's like somewhat like sometimes like an outcast, and sometimes has like the weird zany ideas, but he also has like the soulful, sensitive side to him, and it's just like they can do so much with Gonzo. It can like he can be. They often use him as like the heart sometimes, but then at the same time he can like just shoot out of a cannon,
Just like us, you and me, Brian.
But I think back to your point about character development and the fact that season 1 really was kind of about them finding their own characters. Yeah. I think that's why it was much easier or much more appealing for celebrities to want to join in later seasons, because I found the celebrities weren't necessarily carrying the episodes as much as they were in season 1.
Yeah.
Because they were kind of coming to join this collective of existing characters, and they were just, one of the characters among a group of already established characters.
Yeah. Exactly. Like season 1, there's the Florence Henderson, who was Mrs. Brady, was one of the guest stars, and there's a whole scene where she's just singing a song and there's no Muppets. Like,
yep. It's weird.
It is weird. Like, I don't want that. I want Mark Hamill singing like show tunes with like the Muppets. That's what I want to see.
I like that they would go back and forth, because like sometimes they'd have these celebrity guests that maybe they were very comedic, but they end up almost being the straight man to the Muppets, because they can make the Muppets and they can fill it with as many of the Muppets as they want to make the scene as chaotic as they want. Yeah. And then you have the one person who's an actual human grounding us in reality of being like, how would I respond? Or it's fun to see this dignified celebrity, how they're responding to the insanity around them.
I was just going to say, I was just rewatching I think it was The Muppets Now. Yeah. And the very last episode with Seth Rogen and Fozzie, and they did that exact same thing. Seth Rogen was the straight man covered in babies, trying to explain the insanity of babies running around with knives. And that's hilarious.
We talked in a very early episode. That was like, I thought Muppets Now wasn't the best, but I think that scene with Seth Rogen was absolutely hilarious.
Yes.
So, since we're still in the primetime Muppet Show era, I know we've talked about the Mark Hamill episode, which is like my always go-to for getting people to watch the show. So, Beth, do you have any episodes offhand that you think are great episodes that you can think of offhand? Because I have a few, but I want to see if you have any.
None that jump out. I mean, when I had the DVDs, I only had season 1, so I feel like that was the season I watched more than anything. Yeah, none jump out at me.
Okay. Steve Martin is a really good episode from season 2, and the whole premise of that is that the theater is closed, and they're auditioning new acts, and he's just like there with them, and it's just kind of cool. Or John Cleese, he has this big thing where, I mean, he again you wouldn't expect John Cleese to be the straight man in anything, but it's the whole thing where like he's saying, Kermit, I'm your guest. Why I'm not going to sing a song, and then all his Muppets around him saying, we will not sing a song, and like just like forcing him to perform against his will, which is just fantastic. Or
that's a great premise, by the way. I haven't seen that episode, but I love that premise. I love John Cleese too, so I want to watch that episode now.
Or they have Harry Belafonte. He's singing the Banana Boat song, and like as they're going through it, Beauregard and Fozzie are trying to like get all the. They're trying to get bananas for the set, and Beauregard keeps bringing him everything but bananas. It's like, bananas, they're yellow, and it's just like. I should have came prepared with like a better list, but like there's just so many great guest stars that the Muppet Show has had. One of the ones, I mean, it's one of the 2 episodes that's not on Muppets, on Disney Plus, I think because of rights issues. They did a whole episode with Brooke Shields where it was Alice in Wonderland, and I think it's just licensing rights that one's not on there.
Oh, I remember that one.
I would say that this era ends with The Great Muppet Caper, which is the second Muppet movie, which I think is you could kind of view it as like the 2-hour finale of the Muppet Show. I think it's just it kind of has the same kind of feel of the Muppets putting on a show, because even within that movie they break the fourth wall all the time, and they say like the opening of the movie is called, they're singing a song called "Hey, a Movie," and they even say, "Hey, we're going to do a movie, and it's going to have all this stuff in it." So I think that's like the Muppets, just like the Muppet movie putting on.
Yeah, I agree.
I think the era we're about to get into, though, is like my favorite. Like, I loved 90s Muppets into early 2000s. No, we're at 81. I loved 80s Muppets into 90s, is what I meant to say.
Yeah, oh, for sure. And we'll get to that. But one other thing I wanted to say about the Muppet movie, I think what's brilliant about the Muppet movie, there's so many big name cameos. But you realize that movie was made in 1979. Most of these cameos, honestly, they're dead now. They are. And even when I was watching this as a kid in the 90s, it was outdated then. And I didn't know who half these celebrities were at the time when I was a little kid watching it. But they make it so you don't have to know who the celebrities are for it to be a joke. Like Bob Hope is an ice cream man, and he's funny even if you don't know who that is. Richard Pryor plays a balloon salesman. Milton Berle is not a salesman. Milton Berle's a car salesman. Dom DeLuise is just on a boat randomly, and it's just like later on you're like, oh man, this is funny. Like, oh, that announcer, who was announcing Miss Piggy as the winner of a beauty pageant, which is a thing. That's Jack Geller from Friends. Like now looking back, I recognize all these different actors, but at the time they were still funny without having to lampshade like, hey, look, it's Elliot Gould.
Yeah.
Whereas like you watch the ones in Muppet Now, and it's like they're not that funny because the whole thing is like it's Lady Gaga, and it's only funny if you know that it's Lady Gaga.
Yeah, I'd agree.
You sound like you have some feelings about Muppets Now. I don't know.
I mean, that movie has. We'll get to it. It's my 4th favorite Muppet movie, so I mean it's still in the top half.
There you go.
So, either guys, Matt, Beth, do you guys have any thoughts about that kind of primetime Muppet Show era, the characters, the movies, the specials?
No, I mean it was on the air when I was alive, which makes me feel a lot older than you guys. I mean, I saw some of those movies in the theaters, so they hold a special place in my heart. I could never say anything derogatory about them because they're my childhood. So.
Okay. We'll get to some derogatory comments later, but this era, I
think. Just let's take that sentence out of context. We'll get to some derogatory comments later. Oh, okay. Yeah. What if politicians use that in their speeches? They start their speech like, we're going to get to the derogatory comments, but first.
You know what? It would make people listen to their speeches a lot more. Like, oh man, when are they going to start talking crap?
Very true.
You're welcome, future presidential candidates who I'm sure are listening to this podcast.
We're molding minds here.
Yeah.
All right, what happens next?
Next, you get into like the 80s and into the 90s, and the 80s are a weird time for the Muppets because there's no show going on. I mean, there's Fraggle Rock, but again, that's kind of carrying in a whole different direction. The 80s, as far as the Muppets go, there's really only a few different specials here and there. They did the Muppets celebration of 30 years, which is nothing really to write home about. And then there's the Muppets Take Manhattan, which is okay, but it just, I don't know. It's not the Muppets putting on a movie, which I think is what they do best in most of their movies. And I don't know how I feel about the whole Miss Piggy and Kermit actually getting married because it was a real minister at the end.
And I know we're talking about Muppets, but I wanted to just sidetrack for a second too,
Sure.
because this is a time when Jim Henson really went into some very experimental stuff, and he did really well with experimental stuff. But even if I didn't specifically like the movies, like Dark Crystal or Labyrinth, I'm sorry to use the P word again, but the puppetry in those movies was like astounding. The stuff that they were able to make happen in that time helped to hone that skill and help them to learn some amazing things that I'm sure we would have seen a lot more growth had Jim Henson not died at the end of the 80s.
Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I didn't get into those kind of side projects, but I always very much appreciated the artistry. I mean, it just visually, I was always more drawn to the Muppets. I just found everything else was just a little too dark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and to find out, like, Jim Henson, like, really wanted to make the Dark Crystal. It was, like, his pet project. And the deal they made was, like, hey, we'll let you make the Dark Crystal and fund the whole thing if you make another Muppet movie first. So the Great Muppet Caper was made just so that Jim Henson could make the Dark Crystal. And the fact that there was an obligation movie and he didn't phone it in. He still had, like, the Muppets doing figure eights on bicycles, and it's like all this complicated crap that he probably didn't need to do. He's like, all right, well, if I'm going to do a Muppet movie, I'm going to make it good. And then after that, it's like almost the whole crew is like, all right, now everyone stay around. We're going to make the Dark Crystal now.
Yeah.
See, now as a kid, we only had the 3 Muppet movies at that time, right?
Yeah.
And I hate to even say this, but Muppets Take Manhattan was my go-to of the 3. I loved that movie. I don't know if it was just the whole, New York vibe or the amnesia. I don't know. I just found that whole movie to be hilarious.
Yeah, maybe I was a bit harsh on it. It does have some great things, and it's also the first movie that gave Rizzo the Rat a big central role. He was on. I mean, I'd say after Kermit and Miss Piggy, he probably has the most screen time because early on the Muppets all split, and we just get postcards for them, and it's just Kermit and Piggy and Rizzo with the rats working at the diner, and then at the end the Muppets all come back and put the show together.
And of the 3 growing up, I feel like the one joke we all always made was like, "Hi, Bill. This is Phil, Jill." I don't know why we found that hilarious, but we were constantly quoting that.
Yeah, Kermit gets amnesia. I don't know if you've seen this one, Matt. And he joins up with 3 frogs named Bill, Gil, and Jill, and then he thinks his name is Phil, and they're in advertising.
It makes sense.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I got it.
Yes. Because Kermit gets hit by a car, and because he's naked, they think he's from a nudist colony.
That's fair. I had the same thing happen to me a couple weeks ago, so I get it.
Charges are still pending.
Yeah.
It's like that funny scene, the hilarious scene of Miss Piggy working at a makeup counter with, who was that? I'm blanking on her name.
Joan Rivers.
Joan Rivers. And just like going crazy, throwing makeup at each other, and then like until the manager comes over and fires both of them, and they just break out laughing. That's another great scene.
It's a great movie. Great movie.
Also, all 3 of the original Muppet movies have a cameo by Frank Oz. If you look closely.
Really, I did not know that.
What if I don't look closely? Do they still have a cameo by Frank Oz?
I suppose they do, but you just wouldn't notice it. No, in the first one,
that's fair.
He's one of the bikers who's like the group of them take Fozzie Bear and are like throwing him around, and he's in the scene because he's like actually subtly performing Fozzie while he's actually being one of the bikers. And then in Great Muppet Caper, he's one of the guys in the newsroom when Gonzo yells, "Stop the presses!" And then in the Great Muppets Take Manhattan, he's in the boardroom when Phil, Gil, Jill, and Bill are promoting their Ocean Breeze soap ad campaign.
I'll have to check it out again.
I could have used that as trivia, but I didn't. Told you now.
You didn't. Now we know.
Obviously, next chapter of the Muppets is benchmarked by the passing of Jim Henson, who died suddenly in 1990, May 16th, 1990. Um, from like he was only 53, which is crazy. Like, so Beth, you probably, not to call you out for being the oldest one here, but you're probably the only one who would actually remember Jim Henson dying. Do you remember that news dropping?
I do. And I feel like there's only a few celebrities who have passed where I maybe have shed a tear over. He's probably one of them. I think I don't remember watching the funeral live, but seeing the footage from it,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like it aired on PBS or something. And I remember watching it when I would have been 13,
Yeah.
and it was tough to watch.
I,
I mean, it was beautiful, but
it's still it's still on YouTube now. I've watched it. It's hard not to cry. I'll say that because I mean
yeah.
they have Big Bird going out wearing a green bow tie, singing "It's Not Easy Being Green," and then at the end choking up through tears, saying "Thank you, Kermit," which I mean, of course, Big Bird's real, but also that's Carol Spinney saying thank you to his longtime friend and coworker.
Yeah.
And there was two big projects that came from his death that they served really as great memorials, because there was we've talked about this before in Disney World, the Muppet 3D Vision attraction that they had there was the last time that we had Jim Henson and Richard Hunt performing these characters. And so it was really like this last passion project. And it's kind of exists now in Hollywood studios as it's outdated, but at the same time I understand why it hasn't been replaced yet, because it was like this lasting thing. And it was like the behind the scenes of everything that was going on with like the Disney Corporation and with Jim Henson and like them working together. There was actually supposed to be a bigger Muppet footprint at MGM Studios back when it was called that, and they even had these plans for this great movie ride, but with Muppets versions, because they had a great movie ride there, and then they wanted to parody their own like ride they had in the park using Muppets. And I'm so depressed that we never got that, because that would have been so great and a lot of fun to have. But it threw off, all their business dealings, because they were dealing with Jim and not with the estate. So
yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Richard Hunt, which I'm impressed, Matt. So Richard Hunt is another one of the core Muppet performers. He performed Scooter, Janice, Beaker, Statler, a bunch of characters. He passed away January of '92, so like shortly after Jim Henson's, and like the core group of performers was only like 6 guys, and so like they lost a third of their crew, their main guys within 2 years, and it was kind of like a shuffling around at that point of like, well, what are we going to do? Obviously, like you have to recast Kermit, and like you can't have an episode of Kermit. So Kermit got recast to Steve Whitmire, and a few other characters got recast right away. But the '90s have this really noticeable shift where, like, the Electric Mayhem is barely in. They always have silent cameos because Dr. Teeth and Janice didn't have voices, and so like you notice a bunch of these characters, like Scooter, is almost completely gone in the '90s. So a bunch of characters who are either gone or relegated to silent cameos. And then at the same time, even though there are, there's Muppet Christmas Carol and Muppet Treasure Island, which we'll talk about, Frank Oz's characters kind of got toned down a bit because he was starting to work on his directing career, especially like they had another show in the '90s, Muppets Tonight, and there's a distinct lack of especially Fozzie Bear is like not even in that many episodes, and Miss Piggy's not even in a ton. So you have characters like Kermit and Gonzo and Rizzo the Rat who are pushed more towards the front, and you have like them and like Bunsen and Beaker, and to kind of fill that void, that's when you start bringing in these new characters like Pepe the Prawn or Bobo the Bear to kind of start filling in, and you can
both great characters, by the way. I love both of those guys,
and both still around today. And so it's like it's really this big shock. Like, okay, we're not going to really hear from Rolf or Scooter or the Electric Mayhem for a while. We're just going to focus on some of these guys. And I think that's when Gonzo really got bumped up to like almost like Kermit level of importance to the Muppets.
Yeah, I agree. Like before I get into a little bit more of Muppets Tonight, because that actually I know like there's I didn't watch too much of the Muppet Show. That was like that. I just saw it in syndication, and I never had the DVDs. But I did see a lot more of Muppets Tonight,
Yeah.
and that's like between that and then the movies in the '90s that formed my core memories of the Muppets. So I have a lot of fondness for Muppets Tonight, and maybe that's why I didn't like Miss Piggy is because she wasn't as big in that, and then when she comes in, I'm like, oh my gosh, this diva, I hate her, all that sort of stuff. But I wanted to talk too about Muppet Christmas Carol because that would be the next after that Muppet 3D is that was the first one saying, hey, we can make this still work and it can still be okay even after Jim's dead. And so, I mean, it helps that it's his son and his son loves what his dad did and the legacy that his dad had. And so he was able to create this great piece of art and to do it in a way to tribute both his father and Charles Dickens, I guess. But to also say, hey, we can still do this. We can still even push the envelope of like having the scene with Kermit skating at the beginning of like, we're going to try something that we don't really need to do, but we're going to try it and see if it works. And they made it work. And so to still say we can try new things, we can still be inventive, even without him here. It kind of like this, I feel like there's such a parallel between when Walt Disney died and how everyone was like, they kind of shirked away. Like, well, now what do we do? We're going to see like what Walt, how much of our jobs Walt actually did versus when Jim Henson died. It's like the invention was still there and they still were pushing forward.
Jim Henson was great at building a team. Like I said, I mentioned Jerry Jewell was like the writing force and all these performers, you know, Jerry Nelson, Dave Goelz, Richard Hunt, Frank Oz, all these guys. And so like, even with Fraggle Rock, Jim Henson kind of created this machine, and then he wasn't even there all the time. He's like, all right, you guys are performing it. You guys are writing it. I'll come back to perform characters every now and then or direct. But like, it's kind of like, so he created, cultivated a team that actually could still function. And obviously it's going to be different with him not there. But I mean, I think The Muppet Christmas Carol it's my second favorite Muppet movie after The Muppet Movie. And it's great. And I think it just shows what the Muppets can do. I mean, and I love the decision to have Gonzo be Charles Dickens because not only is it, you know, does it give Gonzo something to do, but it makes that movie one of the most accurate forms of A Christmas Carol because a lot of what he says are direct lines from the book.
Yep.
Yes, it is. It is my favorite Muppet movie, hands down. It is my favorite movie. I am saying that. Of all movies in the world, Muppet Christmas Carol is my favorite movie. I've seen this movie more than any other movie on the planet. I firmly believe it is the greatest Christmas Carol, and I've heard that criticism from folks outside of the Muppet community. The thing that frustrates me the most is so many people, because they knew it was really the first time Kermit was going to be out there with a new voice, people focus on that too much. And they say, oh, it's not Kermit, it's not what we're used to. Of course not. Of course we had to let Kermit's voice develop from there. Mm-hmm. Am I right? Is that was the very first time that Kermit had a new voice publicly?
His first major production, there was a TV special in 1990 called The Muppets Celebrate Jim Henson. And at the very end, there's like all the Muppet characters kind of talking about Jim Henson. At the very end of that, Steve Whitmire's Kermit came in at the very end and said like, hey, look, it's Kermit. And he said like, we're going to be back with more Muppet stuff. But like, that was like 2 lines at a TV special that not many people watched. But this was like the first big production.
You don't know this, Beth, but right now, currently, I am adapting a version of Christmas Carol for the stage for us to do in our local community theater, and I'm like 30 pages into it, and I'm having a lot of fun. And like last night, I was at the part of Ghost of Christmas Present, and I was looking in the book, and I'm like, I thought this was a line from the book, but I stole a line right out of the Muppets movie, one of my favorites, where he's like, "You're a little absent-minded spirit." I'm a large absent-minded spirit. I love that joke, and I literally thought that was in the original, but it's a Muppet Christmas Carol one.
So I also have to sneak in here someone who doesn't get talked about. I've dropped his name a couple times. Jerry Nelson, who passed away in 2012. He's another longtime Muppet performer. He has like the most impressive vocal range of anybody I've ever heard in my life, because he did the voice of so many Muppet characters like the Ghost of Christmas Present. That's him, and he's the Count, and he's Pa Gorg. He's just big characters. But you know who else he is? Robin the Frog and Gobo Fraggle on the same. Like, how much of a range is that?
Huh. That's fascinating.
Yeah, you put Robin and Ghost of Christmas Present right next to each other for the voices. It does not sound like the same person. That's
Yeah.
awesome.
No. And also talking about Robin, it was one thing I remember. So when I was a teenager in youth group obsessed with Muppets, I was one of the cool kids, of course. And I remember you were one of the Beth. I could always go to you and be like, here, I'm gonna nerd out about Muppets for a few minutes before youth group starts. And I remember you saying that like nothing made you cry more than the scene about them talking about the ducks on the river with Tiny Tim when he was dead.
Yes, that destroys me. I mean, I mentioned it in a video the other day that Robin singing Bless Us All, just, I cannot get through that without ugly crying. But man, when Kermit comes home and tells Piggy that he's picked out the perfect plot on the hill overlooking the ducks, Tiny Tim always loved the ducks, and he can't get through it because he's choking up and Piggy's trying to like cover for him. I'm done. I'm just destroyed.
Yeah.
Oh, such strong emotional beats in it. And you get it from Muppets. Like everyone out there is like, oh, Muppets are cheesy. You shut your mouths because you can get some emotional strength out of these Muppets.
You can.
Agreed.
Muppet Christmas Carol is also the first Muppet movie I remember seeing in the theaters. I was 4. My parents took me to see it. And the only thing I remember from the theater is being scared when an animal comes up at the front and yells, "Quiet!" Because, of course,
Right.
I mean, even though the Electric Mayhem isn't that big, you still have to give an animal at least one line.
So Muppets Treasure Island is fine. I don't have complaints against it, but it's not like standout amazing. Christmas Carol was much better for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, Tim Curry is awesome, and the Muppets are still in peak form. But
and if we're going to
it's
mention
fine.
Tim Curry is awesome, we also have to mention Michael Caine was awesome in Christmas Carol. Both of them
course.
A plus casting, and like I'm not going to say they carried it because the Muppets are also a huge part of it, but I mean, great performances by both.
100%.
And then there was Muppets Tonight, which we've talked about, and then Muppets from Space, which is it's my least favorite Muppet movie. I think that's the same with a lot of people, and it's just a different feel. Like for instance, like it's the only Muppet movie with no original Muppet songs.
Really?
They sing to Brick House, and like there's this, like, kind of like a 60s funk soundtrack, but they don't sing any of their own songs.
In a lot of ways, that movie almost feels a little bit like Muppets Now in that it felt like they were trying to force the culture of the day into that movie more so than some of the other movies have a more timeless characteristic. This was like, let's throw in like kids from Dawson's Creek.
Yeah, I was going to say the Dawson. We don't need to hear from the Dawson's Creek kids for a few minutes. It's like,
no.
I did like the satire of Independence Day when the doctor gets thrown against the window. Release me. that was the only part of that movie that I remember and like thinking that was hilarious.
But also Jeffrey Tambor and Bobo are a great foil as the villains.
Yeah, agreed.
I love this. It's such a dumb little scene when he's trying to he's telling Bobo like, get the remote, the goat.
Did that movie kill the Muppets for like 10 years? Was there anything big in between 98 and 2011?
Nothing major. I mean, it wasn't because of that movie. I mean, a lot of stuff happened. I call that like the recasting because like in the early 2000s, there were some TV specials here and there, but you got to realize that was when Frank Oz officially retired as a performer. And I mean, Eric Jacobson, who has taken over most of his characters now, is doing great now, but it took him a while, especially his Fozzie Bear took a little bit to get there. That's also when Jerry Nelson, who I talked about, he stepped back for health reasons, then he passed away in 2012. And so you really have like, even more so, like they're realizing like they're losing more of their cast members. They kind of have to take that time to rebuild their cast. That's when you start getting, during that time is when you start getting like, all of a sudden, oh, Scooter's talking again, and the Electric Mayhem is coming back, and Ralph is speaking more. And I think they're kind of using that time to rebuild their cast and revisit main characters so that by the time you get to 2011, the Jason Segel movie, you have your main familiar roster back from the primetime days and everybody can have a big role again. I think that's in my blog post, I called that the recasting era.
And just out of curiosity, because I know, I mean, obviously in the 90s, we would have had the Muppet Babies cartoon.
Yeah.
which
Oh yeah.
I believe had a lot of the voices. Was there any other animation projects going on behind the scenes in that decade? Because I feel like recently I know there's a Muppet Babies reboot.
Yeah, with the Muppet Babies had a different cast. That wasn't the same character, same. It wasn't Frank Oz and Dave Goelz and them. That was a whole different cast. Actually, Dave
Oh,
Coulier from Full House did some of the voices on Muppet Babies. If you didn't know that,
really?
That
yeah,
completely fits.
yep.
I did
And
not
like
know that.
Frank Welker, who was like Fred from Scooby Doo, and like every animal voice you've ever heard in a TV show, he's Kermit in the Muppet Babies.
Hmm,
Yeah,
I did not know that.
yeah. And so one thing is kind of interesting. There's a 2002 special called "It's a Very Merry Muppet Christmas Movie." It's a terrible title, and it also is kind of like the same premise as the 2011 movie. Like they have to save the theater from being bought
Yeah.
out, which is like they redid that. But it's very big. It's kind of cool. In the very beginning of that special, they have a cameo appearance by the entire cast of Scrubs because Kermit goes to recruit Miss Piggy to help them, and Miss Piggy is being an extra on Scrubs, and they have a little scene of like a fake episode of Scrubs where like it's all of them, and Miss Piggy's supposed to have a body that like is dying, and like they can't revive her, and she keeps going like, "Oh no, I'm awake. I guess I can join your show now," and like the whole cast is just getting so frustrated with her, and like she threatens to kill the janitor, and Neil Flynn just like growls at her, and even like Bill Lawrence, the creator, goes over and says, you're fired." And it's just as funny. It's like that is again, it's just the special isn't that great, but I love that little bit where it's like, hey, let's just bring the Scrubs cast in for a little bit here.
I vaguely remember this special. I remember like Fozzie having to like cross this hallway of lasers like
Yeah,
multiple times as Joan Cusack was watching, and I remember that like they went into a little bit of a "It's a Wonderful Life" sort of
yeah.
thing with Kermit. So I
Kermit's
remember
yeah,
pieces of it, and so when I saw Muppets in theaters, I was like, I love this movie, but I feel like I've seen this. And I, for some reason, was thinking like they had used that "Save the Muppet Theater" like multiple times
yeah,
before, but I
yeah.
know that they use it for sure.
It was the Muppets version of "It's a Wonderful Life," and even like the big thing at the end, Kermit's at a food court and he sees a sign for Doc Hopper's frog legs because they didn't take him down, which is a callback.
I have to say, 2011 Muppets, my favorite Muppets movie. It was so funny to me. I just thought the humor was on point. It was so great to see them back on the big screen, and
Yeah,
it leaned a bit meta into that, which was fine. I didn't feel like it was too much, but I just felt like it blended everything really well, and it was everything you loved about Muppets back again for a modern audience. And
yeah.
unfortunately, that's like you thought, okay, there's a bright future ahead for these Muppets, and then it feels like that was wasted potential because I didn't really like Most Wanted all that much.
Yeah, I
Well,
100% agree. I think I was going to say the music, especially
Oh yeah,
bringing in, Flight of the Concords
mhm,
to write part of that. The whole thing was flawless. The characters were exactly what you would hope from them. The cameos were what you would hope from them. It was an adorable story. It had
mhm,
the human love story. It introduced Walter, and we were all completely on board with him at the end. I mean,
mhm.
I consider him as much a Muppet as anyone else. So
Exactly.
I think it did what it set out to do.
I mean, people remember like it's not the first time. Like people think, oh, Pepe, he's always been part of the Muppets. No, Pepe was not in the Muppet Show. Pepe didn't come around until the '90s, and all of a sudden now he's just as big a star as anybody. And like in
Yeah.
Muppets Haunted Mansion, he was like the second build character after Gonzo.
plus that movie won an Oscar for Man or Muppet Song.
Which
Uh,
I audibly gasped when the human version of Walter was Sheldon Cooper.
yeah.
That was so good. That was such good guessing.
The best surprise reveal since Michael Scott in the Office finale.
Oh,
Really good.
Also, I mean, you could tell for me, like that movie had brought back so many characters. Like Uncle Deadly. Uncle Deadly was in a couple episodes of the Muppet Show way back when, and was just kind of a background character. And they brought him back, and since then he's been one of the best things about current Muppets. I love that character, and I love Matt Vogel's performance of him, and just like all the little like the I don't know if Matt, if you know, like the giant full body blue Muppet named Thog, who was like back from like the '70s. They took the time to rebuild him. They brought back like Wayne and Wanda. Like it was basically like a
mhm.
Muppet nerd's dream of like You know how many times I like pause that movie, like what characters are in this scene? Wait, this group shot. Okay, who can I see? And like they rebuilt so many classic characters that it was just like a love letter to Muppet fans from Jason Segel and Nick Stoller.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed.
And I'll agree with you about Muppets Most Wanted, but I could do a whole movie of Ty Burrell and Sam the Eagle. That was fantastic.
The Thank You Muppets No More Questions song was top notch.
Yeah, but I mean,
I would agree.
he's the best part of Modern Family, and he was the best part of that Muppet movie. Like best casting, like he saves it, and I think he's the reason why that's number 4 over Muppets for me personally. I have that as number 5.
Well, and I'm a giant Tina Fey fan, and I just felt the whole thing. I wasn't on board with Constantine. I didn't like just none of it. I didn't like the settings. I didn't like the music.
Yeah.
Well, and the whole thing about like the Muppets have like Fozzie is somewhat dim-witted, but like to be so dumb, like he cover up the mole. Oh, it's Kermit. No, it's not. Like that's not Fozzie's dumbness. I did appreciate that Animal knew right away that it wasn't Kermit, though. I like that touch.
Well, but you assume he can smell.
Yeah,
that's like Jason in The Good Place finding out that they're not in the good place. Oh, Jason figured it out. Man, that's a real low, guys.
Yeah. So then that obviously Muppets Most Wanted and Muppets they had 2 feature films within 3 years. I'm like, cool, it's coming back, and they had the Muppets TV show, which I have a lot of thoughts on. So I'm curious, Beth, what's your thoughts on the 2015 series?
It wasn't my favorite. I don't even think I got through all of it. I probably made it through about half of it. Again, it felt like it was very forced. It was trying to capitalize on that Parks and Rec Office success and do something similar, and it didn't work for me. And again, and not for the reason, I know a lot of people were complaining that it was too adult.
Exactly, that's
And
not my complaint either.
I have no issues with that because I've said it at the beginning. The Muppets were always for adults, but it wasn't funny. It wasn't clever. It was just forcing the Muppets into what they felt was going to be a successful format of the day.
Yeah,
it was modern adult humor versus timeless adult humor, and there's a difference.
See, my issue with it wasn't either. I think the Muppets could work in any format. They can do mockumentary, whatever. The core of it was the characters. They got some of the characters they did pretty well, like Rolf as the bartender, perfect, A plus, that's great. But some of the characters they just got wrong and they felt off. Which going way back, like I've seen so many clips of like Jim Henson and Frank Oz talking about like the characters and their dynamics and like keeping that who they are, essence of who they are, is so important. Like Miss Piggy will never be the same because nobody knew Miss Piggy like Frank Oz knew Miss Piggy, and like he's talked about how like don't call me a voice actor because I'm putting a whole performance into this. It's not just a funny voice, and so like. For instance, I think Fozzie and Scooter were done the worst in the 2015 series because Scooter was always a little bit nerdy and maybe a little insecure, but he wasn't such like a wimpy mama's boy like he was in the 2015 series. And it's like that kind of character you can see in TV characters where they think, oh, it's all like the mom jokes, but it's like that doesn't fit Scooter, and it just kind of took you out of it. Or like with Fozzie Bear and the whole, I didn't like the whole thing about him. Dating what's her name from Garfunkel and Oates. That was dumb. And like the whole thing about him Jay Leno getting mad at him for stealing stuff, and it's like that's not Fozzie. Like Fozzie is an insecure bad comedian who really wants to be funny, and it's just they're trying to force the Muppets into normal sitcom plots, and it just didn't let them be their characters.
Yeah,
see, headcanon is that the Muppets were taken over by the Muppets. And this was the Muppets show from
Interesting.
So
yeah,
that's what happened, guys. That's where we're at.
Yeah. They also,
but that's not nearly as bad as Muppets Now. That because we talked about that, and that was really hard.
Am I the only one who didn't hate Muppets Now?
You might be.
I can't maybe strongly dislike, but I didn't hate it. It's hard for me to say I hate anything the Muppets did.
I actually felt like it somehow paid homage to the original in a way that definitely the previous show hadn't.
Some of it.
And that I thought the bits were good. I thought it was cute that it went back to, okay, let's do something that, like the cooking show, I actually thought was adorable with the goose whose name I can't remember.
Beverly Plume.
Thank you. I liked that. I liked the Miss Piggy Tay Diggs bit every episode.
That part was fine. That part felt like classic Piggy.
Yeah.
Which I didn't like because I don't like classic Piggy. But my big complaint was the science stuff because they messed up the Honeydew and Beaker dynamic by making Honeydew like actively a jerk versus indirectly. Like, I think it's a lot funnier for Honeydew to accidentally get Beaker hurt with it just him focusing on science and not realizing what's going on behind him, instead of like, no, I'm going to force you to go through these things because that's what I want to do.
And to that point, they also did kind of beef up the educational content, which never really was there in the original show either. No. Like, they really were trying to teach kids something through this. And in that, I guess the show was a little ambiguous as to who its audience was, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The Pepe show was pretty good. I think that it didn't reach the potential that it had, but I think there is potential there for sure. And then the Fozzie interviewing guest celebrities is also a lot of potential. We saw the potential hit it with Seth Rogen, but not as much with some of the other guests.
I think with both of these shows, the 2015 and Muppets Now, one of the best things, again, going back to Uncle Deadly and having him kind of be like the assistant / gay best friend of Miss Piggy was like A+. And I especially love, I don't know if you said you didn't finish it. Did you get to the episode of 2015 series where Miss Piggy's trying to find a friend to hang out with, and then at the end she realizes, oh, Uncle Deadly's been there all along. And the best part at the very end, it shows Uncle Deadly is like at a local theater performing Clueless, and he is playing the part of Cher on Clueless.
Amazing.
Yeah. And like he's giving it his all. He's like, doesn't matter the fact that I'm like a horrifying monster man. That doesn't even come up. They don't address it, which is perfect. And he's just like, I'm a Shakespearean actor. I'm going to do this line from Clueless, and it's just like, he saves modern Muppets for me in a big way. I think Kermit and Gonzo are still classic. It's hard to mess up with them. And a lot of that is probably still because you still have Dave Goelz at 75 years old, still kicking. And like, I don't know what I'm going to do as a Muppet fan when he either dies or retires, because nobody else can be Gonzo. He is the only Gonzo that's ever been.
Wow. I didn't realize that.
Yeah. He's the only one from the original Muppet Show days who is both still alive and still performing.
And you can hear a little bit of the tired in his voice, specifically in the Haunted Mansion special that they had last year.
Yeah.
You could hear the age where I don't feel like I ever heard the age at any other point in any recording.
He's got to be retiring somewhat soon. I mean, even for the Fraggle Rock reboot, he dubbed his characters. He wasn't on set. He was still performing Booper and Traveling Matt, but he was dubbing the voices this time.
Sure.
Now, the Haunted Mansion had to give you some hope for Muppets to go forward. I thought that was flawless.
I liked it a lot, especially as a big fan of the Disney parks. I loved it.
I did like it. But, oh yeah, but the thing is, like, there wasn't enough diversity for the characters to do, because I feel like for a lot of the scenes, it was like, all right, just grab Muppets at random. We're all going to sing a song. But I think that the thing you said earlier when we talked about that, Matt, was that there aren't a lot of characters in the Haunted Mansion. So it was like, there's only so many characters to go around. So I'll give them a pass on that. But I would love to see more stuff like that, for sure.
I thought it was brilliant. I saw it several times. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
I hope that they nail this Electric Mayhem thing. And I think that they need to go back to the 90s. And I've seen this proposed where they're like, do Muppets Do Great Gatsby or some other novel that's in public domain, because they did really well with that formula between those two movies. And it's just fun when you have all these different characters and you can take your Muppets and put them over these characters and adapt them that way.
I still say the Muppets need to do with the Blues Brothers.
Oh.
I think that's the scene you could do. And I mean, just think like, imagine instead of Aretha Franklin singing, it's Miss Piggy singing, and or you could probably still have that. She's still around. You could still do that. But I mean, I just think that is the movie. Or couldn't you see Miss Piggy taking the Carrie Fisher role and like attacking them with a rocket launcher?
Yes,
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
for sure.
That is up her alley for sure.
And just swap out the band members for the Electric Mayhem, and that's because the Blues Brothers is my favorite. Well, no, it's not my favorite movie. It's in my top five. My favorite movie is School of Rock, but Blues Brothers is top five.
I'm a little nervous about the Electric Mayhem TV show just because I feel like
Me too.
it's been long enough from any kind of hardcore Muppet interaction that are folks today even gonna know who the Electric Mayhem are?
Exactly. And they weren't really done super well in 2015 series. Again, atrocious blasphemy. They try to say that Dr. Teeth and Janice were exes in that show. Yeah,
That's weird.
that is weird. And I don't like it. They also turned Zoot into a conspiracy theorist and Floyd into a hippie. But fun fact, so the trumpet player Lips, who was only added into into the Electric Mayhem in the last season of the Muppet Show to give Steve Whitmire a character in the gang, in the band, and over the years sometimes he was there, sometimes he wasn't. In the 2015 series, he spoke his first line of dialogue in over 30 years since the Great Muppet Caper was the last time he spoke.
Wow.
There you go.
Insane.
That's another thing could have been trivia.
Yeah.
Do you guys have anything else to add? Because we can jump into trivia if you want.
Well, I said that my favorite character is Gonzo. So Beth, who is your favorite Muppet?
So I'm torn. Can I pick two? Because
Yes.
what I love more than anything is the dynamic between Robin and Kermit.
Yeah. Okay. Absolutely. I think that's on brand for you.
I do also love Gonzo, but because that's already taken, I'll say Bobo.
Bobo is fantastic.
He's so funny.
There's a reason that him and Pepe are the only two characters from the 90s who are still like actively in like everything the Muppets do today.
I think it was the 2011 movie that where Bobo was a bad guy with
Yeah.
Uncle Deadly, and he just turns to him at one point. I think it was in this where he's like, "Do you think we're on the wrong side? Do you think we're the bad guys?" Or something like that. And Uncle Deadly's is just like, ugh.
There's also a really funny scene in Muppets Tonight where he's the security guard, and it's like he's telling them nobody gets in if they're not on this list, and like the guests of the week was like couldn't get in, and there's like a whole list of people. I think at one point it was like Jay Leno and whoever else. Like I'm supposed to be here. And he's like, your name's not on the list, and it's just like that's just his dim-wittedness. There's a whole episode where Bobo was in love with Cindy Crawford. And
I'm surprised I didn't bring up Bobo when we talked about lovable oafs a couple weeks ago.
Yeah. Okay, but I have to mention that episode where Bobo was in love with Cindy Crawford has the most like inappropriate joke I've ever seen in a Muppet thing, and it's terrific. Matt, do you remember this?
The balloons one?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, Beth, do you remember this?
No.
So he's trying to flirt with Cindy Crawford, and he has an earpiece, and Rizzo is telling him what to say from the next room. And as like some other rats come in, like it's supposed to be like Rizzo's nephew comes in with a stack of balloons. So Rizzo is talking to the other rat, and Bobo thinks he's still giving him what to say. And so the line was that Bobo says to Cindy Crawford, "Those are some great balloons you got there. Maybe you'll let me play with them later."
Amazing.
And then she punches him through a door.
As one would, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't know what Disney Plus is doing not having that show on Disney Plus. Also, slam dunk. You mentioned that the way back the Muppet Vision 3D. There was also a TV special called The Muppets at Walt Disney World, which was like the last time that Jim Henson performed most of his characters and Richard Tom performed most of his characters. It's seriously just the Muppets break into Disney World, and you have like Beauregard is dragging Miss Piggy on rides, and Kermit and Robin are trying to round up the gang, and Gonzo gets into like the cast laundry area, and the Electric Mayhem goes and plays a show at the Epcot, and it's just a blatant promotion for both Disney World and the Muppets, because that's when they were in talks with Jim Henson about doing the buyout back then. And the special is on YouTube, but it's like it's at Disney World. Disney Plus owns the rights to everything in it. Like, just put it on Disney Plus.
It doesn't make sense.
Instead, we get Letters to Santa, which was a mediocre special from 2008. It's like, that's what you put on Disney Plus? Okay. That'd be far down on my list.
Well, it's like canceling a movie that you'd already filmed instead of putting it onto a streaming platform at the very least. I don't know. Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
But Disney didn't do that. That's WB. That's their I don't know what's going on with these companies. They're all making a bunch of bad mistakes and screwing everything up. So we'll see what entertainment looks like in 5 years.
Okay. Anyways, yes, I think, and if anybody else, unless anyone else has any final thoughts, we can go into our trivia.
Let's do it.
So what was our trivia from last week?
Last week, we talked about genre-bending episodes, and Brian asked about an episode of Boy Meets World that was a spoof off of Scream. And so Jennifer Love Hewitt was in it, and obviously she was in it because she was a 90s icon, but there was another reason that she was in that episode. And so what was that reason, Brian?
Well, first, Beth, do you know this episode or no?
I do not, and I consider myself to be a Boy Meets World aficionado.
This is one of the most famous episodes. It's called "And Then They Were Sean." It's the Scream episode where it ends up being a dream sequence where they're all in the school and everybody gets killed, and Jennifer Love Hewitt makes a guest appearance. And part of the reason for that was because at the time she was dating Will Friedle, who played Eric Matthews.
Oh, that makes sense.
So like at one point he just starts making out with her, and it's like, oh, okay, well maybe it's a little less uncomfortable now that you know that they were actually dating at the time.
There you go.
So,
Beth, did you come up with the trivia? We gave you the reins to have any kind of Muppet trivia.
So my question is, how did Jim first make Kermit? What was Kermit made out of?
There you go. What was he made out of? Awesome. Well, Beth, thank you so much. It was a blast having you. We finally got to do our Muppets episode. But until next time, I'm Matt.
I'm Brian.
And I'm Beth.
And we're reminding you to stay tuned and keep watching.